I started out as kind of a pre-vet major, veterinary science, and it just didn't agree with me very well. And so I ended up starting off in photography and gradually ended up in the ceramic studio. And it was a place that, more than any place I've ever been, ever had been as a young person, felt like home. I suppose I knew I was serious when I would enroll for a full complement of classes for a semester or quarter and drop everything but ceramics. I think that maybe the most important thing I did as a young person was to set up a studio, to be able to find a place that allowed me to work somewhat inexpensively. It was challenging, but it was a little bit like giving yourself graduate school, except that there's no instructor around. It was kind of like, figure this out. It was like woodshedding, you just go out there and work every day and see what develops. And the studio experience is unique in that you can't predict what's going to come out of it or what you'll get interested in if you're not in the studio having that experience. It's not the only way, but it matters enormously. I had built a salt kiln that was fired with fuel oil and wood, and then it was vapor fired, salted at the end of the firing. And I hadn't done that before. It was a try for me. I had seen historical pieces that I admired, but I didn't really know how they were made. I would have had to just make that up. So I fired salt glaze for, probably 16 years, something like that. And then I gradually changed direction and changed palette and changed temperature and so on and so forth. I do glaze tests all the time, and I don't think of myself as a glaze geek, but I find them surprisingly rewarding, even when they come out ugly. It's okay. And it taught me that if an ugly glaze, or what you think is an ugly glaze, has the right context, it's fabulous. It can be fabulous. And you can look at a glaze that stands alone all by itself, that is this marvelous thing, but there's nowhere to put it. It doesn't have context, or it can't find context. So the relationship between surface and color and transparency and opacity and context is a big deal. And I think it will always be kind of a big deal for me. It will always be something that is somewhat challenging. So I'd worked on the wheel for probably 15 or 20 years. And then I was trying to make a pot that had a corner, a sharp corner somewhere. And the way that I got at the sharp corner was to use a plane and to shave off all the finger marks that I had left on the pot, and to create an edge, a vertical edge and a horizontal edge. And where they met was this corner. And so these were thrown pots that I would plane the surface down. So I started to think that, well, perhaps working with slabs was the way to get to these shapes which were more architectural. They had more of a kind of a structural feeling. And so I began to think about pattern as a way, paper pattern, tar paper pattern as a way of holding a form. So I have a two-dimensional pattern that makes a three-dimensional volume. And I was trying to think of a way to make this a little easier for me. Like, is there a way of knowing what this is going to look like, besides what I have in my head and this imagining this? And so I started to pursue a CAD program that would fold and unfold a volume. so that I could design a volume on the screen and unfold that volume into a two-dimensional pattern and then print that out. But that was transformational. That was a kind of epiphany that that led me to think about the difference between throwing on the wheel and hand building, between ways of making that I hadn't thought of before, that I hadn't pursued before. And it just gave me another way of seeing the world, you know, and it opened the doorway to form that wasn't possible on the wheel. So I was rolling out a lot of slabs, but I was trying to figure out a way of making slabs simpler. I built a big extruder, a hydraulic extruder. It's like a large Play-Doh machine, you know, that kids have. So those slabs sit in a pile, and I roll them out on a table, and then I, using the computer, I'll design a form or a series of forms or some tries, and I print them out on a large inkjet printer on craft paper, and I either use the pattern as craft paper or else I transfer it to tar paper, depends on the object, and then lay that pattern on top of the slab, stick it to it, you know, put a little water down and roll it with a rolling pin. Cut it out and assemble it. I think of the clay career in some ways as a series of small epiphanies all strung together over time. And there's no great big light that went on. People have been making pots for a long time, you know. We've been eating off of plates for centuries. And you do something and you go, God, that's really amazing. That's really, it's fun to be able to have that feeling of having achieved something or having discovered some small thing. And then the next day comes and you go, it wasn't that big a deal. I should have thought of that sooner. I got to say that goes on all the time.